name is Ali Sherlock. I work with the Fall River Conservancy, and I work with a number of other organizations in the community, so I wear a few different hats. I work with the Shasta Valley RCD as the watershed monitoring coordinator, and I do all the watershed monitoring for the RCD. I also work with California Trout and have managed a grant through NIFWIF for the last 2 years out on Hat Creek, and we employ tribal youth to work on the restoration project that we're doing out there. But today I'm here to talk about the Fall River Conservancy, and the topic of the discussion that we're all having today is drought. So it's interesting that Kara's invited us here today. Fall River, if any of you guys are familiar with it, is one of the largest spring-fed rivers in California. And so drought has not affected us in the same way that it's affected many people in the Shasta Valley. But we are a very small nonprofit. Currently I'm the only staff, and we have a very active working board. But I'm happy to be here today to share some of the projects that we're working on. Our most successful project to date is the Wild Trout Monitoring Program. So I'm going to share that as an example of what we've accomplished as a small nonprofit over the last couple of years. So I'm going to talk about the Fall River Conservancy's background and mission, our strategic conservation approach, and then I'm going to show a video that the Fall River Conservancy has made called Cold Water Oasis, and that'll give a bit of background about the Fall River and show how we try to tell our story as a small nonprofit. Then I'll talk about the Wild Trout Monitoring Program and discuss some of the small nonprofit challenges and strategies that we've had over the last couple of years. So the mission of the Fall River Conservancy is to preserve the biological, scenic, cultural, and agricultural heritage of the Fall River Valley by conserving for present and future generation the valley's extraordinary lands, waters, and wildlife resources. So how many of you have actually been out to the Fall River or know where I'm talking about? Oh, great. Okay, good. An educated audience. So the Fall River Conservancy's strategic approach is to protect strategic lands for habitat restoration, improve habitat and wild trout populations, improve and protect water quality metrics, conduct scientific research and monitoring, and form conservation partnerships. So, let's see if I can get this going. So this video was created in 2009, and we use the video to share with our potential funders, our project partners, and to share the story of the Fall River. Because we don't have an endangered species on the Fall River, because we have a lot of cold water, we don't have funding attention out in that valley. And using this video and using other media strategies, we've been able to bring attention to the Fall River. And so I wanted to share this with you guys and show sort of the story behind how the Fall River Conservancy started. I don't know if we're getting sound. Try that again.
sources of cold, clean water trump all. Located approximately 50 miles east of Mount Shasta, the Fall River Valley should be bone dry, but it's not. Instead, dozens of interconnected cold water springs grew off the surface, creating an oasis that serves both people and nature.
This is a very special river in the state of California in terms of water supply. I believe the discharge is around 1 million gallons per minute, which is pretty significant discharge over the course of a year. So it contributes in large part to the entire water supply coming out of the Sacramento Basin.
The Fall River meanders through a big, flat, wide-open valley of wild rice and cow ranches, and eventually dumps into the Pitt River. From there, it flows through one of California's larger hydroelectric projects, and finally on into Shasta Lake. The water is then used as part of the Central Valley Project, which helps irrigate tens of thousands of acres of the Sacramento Valley.
This is a beautiful cold water spring, and it's excellent habitat for our rainbow trout here. It's a blue ribbon trout fishery. In addition to being an excellent cold water habitat for fish, we also have many nutrients that make this an extremely productive system. And if you compare the biomass that's coming out of this system to, say, surface waters elsewhere, we're seeing probably 4 times, 5 times, maybe even 6 times more invertebrates in this system than we would in other systems. So it's an extremely productive system, and that makes it an excellent trout fishery.
Fall River is one of the most unique fisheries, I think, on Earth. The giant spring creek that you actually fish from a classical flat-bottom john boat. I spend about 3 months a year here, and I try to just totally sight fish and head hunt rising fish with dry flies. We have the hex hatch here. Happens from mid-June till the end of July. Biggest mayfly on Earth. And I just love how Fall River as a system is just connected to these amazing spring-fed lakes too, and you can have very different angling experiences throughout the course of the day.
It's not just about fishery. We, like our drinking water for our house, we drink the water out of the Fall River. And we ski on the Fall River and we boat on the Fall River. With the state park now in Algie, there's quite a few people that will come up and kayak out to the river and camp out in the state park.
When you come over the hill and big you look out over the valley here, you know, see we're just blessed with an abundance of water here. The river's sort of, it's really kind of our lifeblood, all our livelihood with crops and rice, you know, or without the river, it'd be a totally different situation for us.
Despite still being a phenomenal wild trout fishery and a reliable source of cold, clean water for Northern California, the Fall River faces serious challenges: over-sedimentation, invasive aquatic plants, and even water quality issues.
On this particular river, the primary disturbance we've seen is sedimentation in the upper river and the subsequent invasion by Eurasian water milfoil. We have a river course that's fairly wide open. We don't have a whole lot of riparian coverage, and so the milfoil is getting a lot of direct sunlight, and it also does very, very well under those conditions.
I'll never forget the first day I came up this river. I was just mind blown by the beauty of the native seagrass that was in the river. Just this beautiful green grass in this flatwater spring creek that just grooved with the river. Now if I bring somebody up here in July, they're not going to see that seagrass, they're going to see Eurasian milfoil, which is the non-native invasive species that's here now.
I've been guiding on the river for 25 years, and I'm affiliated with the Fall River Conservancy, a group that we formed a few years back to help work on environmental issues on the river. When I'm guiding or fishing, you know, it's always usually somebody from out of town, and they're always at it all. You know, they see the river and they're like, wow. You know, they don't see the changes like the folks who've been on the river have seen it.
Fall River Conservancy is doing a pretty good job of just reaching out their hand and trying to get the whole community together to be like, hey, this is a special resource that's been here for generations, and we're trying to identify the problems and help fix them.
Our goal at the Conservancy is threefold: protect water quality, restore habitat conditions, and protect one of California's best wild trout fisheries. And there's no doubt that we can do it, especially the way the community's been stepping up. I'm confident that the anglers and the farmers and PG&E and other stakeholders can come together to get the job done. it's just way too valuable to too many people to let it slip away.
It's pretty precious, it's a pretty fragile system, it's one of those things worth saving.
We believe that the Fall River Valley should be an example in California for managing healthy working landscapes. We envision restored meadows and marshlands that attract waterfowl by the thousands, functioning cold water spring systems that support robust populations of large, healthy wild trout. We foresee the Fall River becoming a critical refuge for cold water biodiversity, and we envision Fall River ranchers continuing to produce healthy crops and livestock while also protecting water quality and sensitive habitat. The Fall River Conservancy envisions a local community that works together to preserve the historic ranches, the large land tracts, and the cultural heritage that will only survive by being passed from one generation to the next.
This river, this valley is home. My great-grandkids are the 7th generation here. I've been all over the country and I don't know of a better place to live.
I was in the Bay Area the other day. I mean, there's thousands and thousands of cars. You see the cars and you don't know anybody. But when you live in Fall River Valley, when you pass a car, you expect them to wave to every car.
When I drive home in the evening, the river and the road parallel each other for probably a quarter of a mile. And the sun goes down behind Mount Shasta, and there's meadow there, and Spring Creek, and the river. And it still blows me away that this is my driveway. And that will be my enduring memory of Fall River if I ever.
So, I hope you enjoyed the video. One thing you can probably take away from that video is that Fall River Conservancy was founded by a group of fly fishermen and community members that are, of course, dedicated to the river for primarily the fishery, but also are interested in restoring a lot of the conservation issues that have come up in the last couple of years. So the Fall River Conservancy was started back in 2008 by Andrew Braw, and he now works full-time with California Trout. And it was also started by a group of very dedicated landowners and fishermen. So we have a very active working board, which is something that Tom touched on, is an important way to overcome the capacity of a small nonprofit with one staff member. But we try to use videos to tell the story, and we try to use the landowners and the people that are on the river the most to tell the conservation story for us, because they're the ones that are out there, and those relationships and that collaboration has really helped the Fall River Conservancy achieve its goals over the last couple of years. So.
Allie, do you know how much it costs to make that video?
I think it was $5,000. We worked with Culture and Creative, which is based out of Ashland. And I think this video actually was for free, and then, we worked with him and gave him more business. So we've developed, I think, 4 videos with him to date. I'll show another really short one.
Is that Darren?
Yeah. You broke it. I broke the system.
Was Fall River also a historic salmon fishery?
Yeah, so I'm going to get a little bit into that. So the one program that we have initiated over the last few years is our wild trout monitoring program. And the reason we started with this program was because there wasn't a lot of research done on the Fall River, and we knew there were issues, but we needed to know what the baselines were. We didn't know where the rainbow trout spawned, and a lot of landowners had been telling us that, we think there was salmon in the Fall River many, many years ago, and there was no validation for that. So the Fall River Conservancy led the partnership with California Department of Fish and Wildlife, UC Davis, Watershed Sciences Center, CalTrout, to start a wild trout monitoring program and start to understand where the rainbow trout are moving through the system, to help to understand where the important spawning areas are, and to start to get some baseline genetic analysis for that question whether salmon were in the Fall River Valley. So we launched the program in 2013, and to date we've pit tagged 1,000 fish. So we work with California Department of Fish and Wildlife, who previously in the past would have done population estimates, but because of budget cuts, they completely stopped really paying attention to the Fall River. So through this program, we were able to use their expertise in their boats, and then we were able to provide the funding to UC Davis to do the pit tagging. So it was a collaborative effort that met a lot of different groups' objectives. And we took genetic samples of all 1,000 fish to date that have been tagged. So the purpose of our wild trout monitoring program, we want to identify the key spawning and rearing habitats for wild trout. We want to determine how the wild trout utilize the existing habitat, pinpoint sources of mortality and impediments to migration, investigate wild trout genetics, establish accurate wild trout population estimates, and develop a database of science that can help to inform California Department of Fish and Wildlife regulations. So I have another short video. And this one is about our wild trout monitoring program. And it's just going to talk a little bit about how we do our sampling and show the partnership that we've created through this work.
My name's Andrew Braun, the director of the Fall River Conservancy. This is Carson Jeffries from the UC Davis Center for Watershed Sciences. Today we're at Ajamali Lava Springs. We're about to launch the Fall River's first wild trout monitoring program. Sam?
And so what we're doing today is we're putting pit tags, passive integrated transceivers, into 500 trout to see how they move up and down the Fall River, when they move up and down, and what areas they're using for spawning habitat. So the Fall River is spring fed, and which means it has a constant flow and temperature most of the year. And the fish in the Fall River have evolved to utilize that constant flow and temperature by spawning over a 9-month period, which is different than most snow melt systems that spawn just at the end of the snow melt. And so we're interested in looking at how different populations within the Fall River use different habitats and spawn at different times of year to see whether they're one big population or actually there are several small populations in the river. And having a better understanding of how these fish spawn in the different populations, that'll help us manage this population into the future.
Hi there, my name is Ryan Peak. I work at the Center for Watershed Sciences at UC Davis, and today we're going to be pit tagging fish, and each one of these little blue tags is a little pit tag about the size of a grain of rice, and essentially we insert it into the fish, and then similar to a fast track with a car, when it swims through a certain antenna, we get a signal back telling us where that fish was tagged and when, and it's a great way for us to sort of track fish location over time, and it's really important for us to use this data to get at spawning, so we'll know where the fish are moving and when.
My name is Michael Davey. I work with the California Department of Fish and Wildlife, and we're out here boat shocking the Fall River to grab some samples to tag them and mark their movements over time. It's a great opportunity to get along and work with other organizations, nonprofits like CalTrout, and the university with these resources to help us get out to cover some of the stuff right now. Usually under budget cuts with the state, by working together, we're able to accomplish stuff like this. fish move maybe into the responding grounds that might help us with some activities we might be doing through project operations, permitting, these for our So in addition with this, the tagging operation we're doing today with Caltrout and UC Davis, part of the department's focus here is it's a heritage of wild trout water, the Upper Fall River. So this data also will help us just with the management of that water and keep it at its status of a high quality fishery.
Hi, I'm Val Atkinson, and I've been fishing on Fall River since about 1975, and I love the place. It's one of the largest spring systems in the whole United States. We got a great rainbow trout fishery here. It's wonderful that we have Caltrout and Fall River Conservancy helping with the projects up here, and they're doing some fantastic work on the river. And it's also nice to have Orvis sponsoring the fish tagging program, which we have ongoing right today over my shoulder.
My name's Curtis Knight. I'm the Conservation Director for California Trout here in the Fall River Valley. And we're involved with a pretty cool project working with the Department of Fish and Wildlife, with Fall River Conservancy, Caltrout, and UC Davis. And it's a project that is science-based, it's a research project, and it's a good example of the type of projects that Caltrout gets involved with throughout the state, where we want that firm foundation in science to base our advocacy work off of. The other important part of projects like this is you need funders who are willing to invest in that type of model. And Orvis has been a funder of Caltrouts over the years on unique and important projects like this, whether they're research-driven or restoration-driven.
The Fall River is California's largest spring-fed cold water system. It's got a really unique, robust wild trout population. And we care about these fish because they're great indicators of the overall ecological health of cold water in Northern California.
Okay, so that video was created last year at the launch of the program, and we now to date tagged 1,000 fish and completed genetics on it, and we have some initial findings which are exciting. So we've identified that approximately 2/3 of the fish move through the Thousand Springs Array and 1/3 of them move into Bear Creek. So why that matters is it helps us to prioritize where we should work on habitat restoration. So the Fall River has, as was initially pointed out in the first video, very little riparian vegetation cover, has really degraded stream banks. And when you have that many miles of work to do and very little funding, where should we prioritize? So this is helping to identify where we should prioritize, which is the spawning areas and the rearing grounds of the wild trout. Secondly, UC Davis did genetics on all of the trout, and they discovered that there's two very genetic distinct populations of rainbow trout, so two subpopulations that spawn at different times of year, and won't get into the specifics. It's very science genetic-y. They get really geeky on the genetics, but essentially the one population of rainbow trout has the anadromous gene, and so that's, through this research we were able to help actually prove that something that fishermen and landowners of Fall River Valley have thought and kind of talked about for many, many years. So that's exciting, and we can then use this to build on our work. So the goal of, so that sort of gets to the question, why do this research? There's very limited, as all of you know, there's very limited conservation dollars. With a small nonprofit, we did all of this without grant funding, through private dollars. And to us, it was important to help ensure that the Fall River Conservancy and the management decisions we made are grounded in science. So we can go and see that, yes, this area has really bad stream banks, and we know that there's issues with water quality and invasive species, but having the baseline and having researchers involved in the river was important to us. And secondly, as I mentioned already, will help to determine important locations for habitat restoration, which is work that we want to launch in 2015. And it starts to demonstrate and develop our strong partner relationships. So having UC Davis on board, having the Department of Fish and Wildlife directly involved in our work gives us the credibility as a small nonprofit. And again, help to establish baseline conditions. And then we are using this work to help into future grant applications. So we don't have, like I said earlier, we don't have an endangered species. Really not a lot of the large grants does the Fall River fall into, because we have a lot of water and we have somewhat of a healthy trout population, but it doesn't mean that the Fall River Conservancy isn't important. And we view it as, you know, a refugia, a cold water refugia in California that doesn't really exist in many other locations. So using this research will help us in future grant applications and provides validity to our conservation arguments. So the Fall River Conservancy 2015 and beyond, we hopefully will be awarded a grant through the National Fish and Wildlife Foundation to continue and expand our wild trout monitoring research. We just had a private fundraiser and we raised $75,000 to do stream bank restoration. So we will map the Fall River and develop our project list for the future. Implement a pilot stream bank restoration project with fencing, solar stockwater, and planting. And, you know, in the Shasta Valley and the RCD has been doing this for years. Over in the Fall River Valley, there's still miles and miles of cows in the river. There's not solar stockwater projects that have been highly successful, so we are really doing the pilot and doing the initial work to get people on board. And then, of course, always seeking additional funds for more projects. So, because we're here to talk about drought, Kara wanted me to touch a little bit about the Fall River Conservancy's organizational challenges and some of the strategies that we have used to overcome those issues and those challenges. So these are all of the challenges that Tom identified in his talk, and one, of course, is capacity. So we only have one staff, which is me. The Fall River Conservancy was started by Andrew Braun with California Trout, and he's moved over to California Trout full time. So losing the capacity of his knowledge and his work was a huge loss to the Fall River. And thankfully he is stayed involved by being a board member and continues to mentor me to help overcome the capacity. And then we have a very involved working board of directors. So we have 10 board of directors currently. We meet quarterly, and all of the board members are involved in some committee within the Fall River Conservancy. We have time? Okay. Then I'll just skip right through this. Funding, like I mentioned earlier, we don't have a lot of grant opportunities, so we've had to raise all of our funds through private fundraisers. And we have other challenges that other nonprofits have, so I'll just wrap up here. And if you guys are interested in our work, you can check us out at fallriverconservancy.org.
If there are any questions, we can take one or two quick questions. Otherwise, we can move on.
Just these big springs, are they lava tubes or where do they originate?
They are lava tubes. We're working with a geoscientist right now to actually determine where the water is coming from and age it. That research that has been done in the Shasta Valley hasn't really been done out there. So, but it is an interconnected system of many, many springs that are growing up. So it's quite a complex hydrologic system.
I'm curious if you have any industrial land use, either past or present, that you consider as an obstacle to achieving your work.
Industrial, does that include agriculture or?
Well, yeah, I guess industrial scale land use, maybe like monoculture or, agriculture has a wide range.
Right. So
yeah, just like land use challenges to your.
Yeah, that's a great question. And out in the Fall River Valley, there's actually